Hello, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 4 of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. I'm Becca, and this is a podcast that features members of the Virtual Coffee community. Virtual Coffee is an intimate group of developers at all stages of their coding journey, and they're here on this podcast sharing their stories and what they've learned. And we're here to share it with you. Here with me today is my co-host, Dan.
Thanks, Becca. Today we got to talk to Mark Noonan. Mark is a senior engineer at Cypress.io and is a co-organizer at Code for Atlanta. He also works as a program developer for People Making Progress, an Atlanta-based nonprofit serving adults with developmental disabilities at home, work, and in the community. Mark shared with us how his background in music and theater informs his work as a developer, which I found really interesting. And then we spent the rest of the episode talking about his experience in Civic Tech, how working with local Civic Tech groups can benefit your community, can benefit other developers, and of course your own career as a developer.
We start every episode of the podcast like we start every virtual coffee. We introduce ourselves with our name, where we're from, what we do, and a random check-in question. We hope you enjoy this episode. Today's random check-in question is, would you rather be the funniest or the smartest person in the room? So my name is Becca. I am a front-end developer from a small town in Ohio, and I think I would like to be the funniest person in the room because it makes it easier to talk to people and you're more likable, I think. And my grandma was funny, and I always want to be as funny as my grandma, so I'm going with that.
Hi, I'm Dan. I am a developer from Cleveland, Ohio. And I don't know. I feel like lots of times the funniest person often is pretty smart anyway, like I don't want to be the person in the room that everybody's laughing at. Right. So sure, I would take funniest person. And if that means you are absolutely not the smartest person in the room, but like could still have second place or something. I think that's
Oh, so now you're claiming second place smartest, first place funniest, second place smartest.
Yeah. I mean, as long as that's in the realm of possibility. I'm not saying, that's, I'm saying, if this exercise, if I say I'm always the smartest or the funniest person in the room, but it's not like saying that means you're also the least smart person in the room, right?
No, that was not one of them.
It's still open. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it's still a possibility. I could at least still imagine that I'm the second smartest person there.
Right.
If I made this choice.
You're the funniest, and you can't imagine that you are the second smartest person.
All right, that's it. That's my answer. Yes.
All right. And I'm Mark Noonan. I am a senior engineer at Cypress.io. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm mostly happy just to be in the room. That's good for me. I probably would prefer to be the funniest person than the smartest person if I had to make that choice. But in this specific room with the two of you, I will take first place smartest person ahead of Dan. And
I mean, somebody had to do it. Somebody had to do it.
If this
I'm
is how
fight
the
Dan
choices...
for funniest, and then I'll be third place for smartest.
I mean, I called dibs on second place. I don't know what to tell you.
I didn't even know that was an option. It wasn't an option. You made it up.
I mean, that's it. Listen, I always got to call dibs.
Everybody gets a medal in a room of 3. It's okay. Everybody's walking away with something. Yeah.
I feel like I have lost I got the participation ribbon. I've got the purple ribbon. Welcome, Mark. It is really good to have you here with us and being the smartest person in the room. So we'll let you do most of the talking today. We always like to start off with your origin story, how you got to this point of where you are in your developer career. So if you could give us your overview, we would love to hear it.
Okay. I'm going to try to remove some of the twists and turns. But the short version is I kind of thought about doing this job really since I was a teenager. I started making websites and stuff like that. But when I was like 16, 17, I was in Ireland where I grew up, and I was learning bits and pieces of programming and hitting some problems. And I just hit a point where I was sure this was not for me. Like, you had to be more into maths. You had to be smarter than I was to be good at programming. And a lot of that had to do with what was available to me education wise. If you get stuck with a book that you got from the library, um, it's just very hard. Like back then, this is, right around the year 2000. It's a little bit harder to get resources than it is today. So I ended up going to college for music and English and did a master's in ethnomusicology. Like that's my education background. Really loved all of that stuff, but I kind of kept getting sucked into making websites on the side, and gradually, like, found more and more things where I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that so I could make this for this reason, for this family business or whatever. Um, and eventually found myself finding things like Free Code Camp and CS50, and using those courses to learn more. And that kind of got me into the Atlanta Free Code Camp community, which got me connected to Code for Atlanta, which is like Civic Tech, Code for America nonprofit work, which really aligned with my day job, which was at a nonprofit working with adults with developmental disabilities. So I just kept doing more stuff and learning more things until like it was kind of obvious that I was able to do this for a job and it was time to start thinking about switching. So that led me to, being developer, Twitter, following people, connecting with people there. And that kind of introduced me to some places where I could interview and slowly get better at interviewing and then, found a job.
That's awesome. I love the non-traditional backgrounds, and I feel like we hear a lot of people that have come from music backgrounds and made the transition into the dev world, and my background's in English too. Did you find, like, you were able to use any transferable skills or that background helped you in some way as you learned to code?
I think looking back, there are a couple of ways. One is like when you practice music, you're able to get into flow as you play. And so there's this kind of, it happens with writing too, where you have this experience on your own of working on something and being in the moment of like, and stuff coming together. And it can still be challenging, but it's sort of fun and you don't notice the time passing. And it seems like when we're learning development or actually doing like the day to day work, being able to get into that state, um, the kind of on demand is really useful so that you can actually settle in and achieve something in a few hours, um, without quite having a full plan going in how you do it. I think that's useful from playing an instrument. But also we used to have to read like big symphony scores where there's lots of interconnected pieces and you're supposed to be able to talk about how they work together. And I was never like really that into the theory part of what we were doing in college, but it did exercise a part of my brain that was like, and same with plays and with any kind of complicated structure you're supposed to get into. Theater was a big thing for me in college. And so the combination of like thinking about an hour or two long play as a whole script and writing some and directing some, as well as, okay, we have this big complicated thing, but we have 48 hours to build all the sets and stand this show up and do it for a week. And there's a lot of rushing around as well as trying to maintain this complicated, like, so all of that, at least I feel like it exercised some of the same stuff mentally for me that I'm using now without being directly like how to write a form in HTML or something.
Yeah.
I love that. I had never really connected the flow state thing with, you're totally right, with between music and developing. And I like that. I mean, I just really like the way you described that. And it is true. Like, not once you said it, I thought about it, and it is the exact same way. Like, and you can feel when you're not in it too, but you can feel when you're
Yeah.
in it. And that idea of like putting, I don't know, just getting started on something and not knowing exactly how it's going to turn out, but you're, and it's like you're driving it, but it's still like you're in that flow. So you're not forcing it. And at the end, something, hopefully at least something, something has come out. Um, I, I had never connected those two, the music flow state and the developing flow state before. I really appreciate that. That's cool.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and, like, thinking about how all of the pieces are working together in whatever you're doing. I think that sometimes we think about transferable skills like, "Okay, and how do they exactly match up?" But you're talking about, like, exercising maybe the same muscles or the same part of your brain to learn new things, and, if you're breaking down a poem or if you are matching patterns in when you're writing or playing music. Those are all things that we're doing as coders. It doesn't necessarily mean that it we can understand directly how that works, but I think it certainly helps to build those skills as we learn new things.
Yeah, and I think it sort of when I started to listen to specific podcasts as programmers were talking, this is what kind of helped me go from learning on my own to being able to work with others and interact with other developers. Was like I got quite far on my own, but I didn't know how to say any of the words out loud.
Mm.
So listening to podcasts, especially one called Coding Blocks and stuff like Code Newbie, let me hear how developers were talking. And one concept was like levels of abstraction. And they're talking about not mixing levels of abstraction, which when you're new, that's a complicated concept because you're not sure what levels of abstraction means, let alone to know if you're mixing them or not. Um, but when I start to think of like, yeah, you can spend time looking at a single line in a play or something, or the conversation or the whole scene, and zoom out further to see how things like structurally relate to each other, um, and understanding what layer of the structure you're in when you're doing something, um, like the ability to zoom in and out to a specific layer and understand its purpose and the structure connected above and below it. That is hard to like articulate, I think, in programming because it's often so abstract. But when you're making art, you have to think about those layers all the time because you're working on the details of a piece and on the whole piece, and you sort of do it seamlessly without knowing that you're zooming in and out. But I do think they kind of relate.
Oh, absolutely. And I love that. That was such a great description of how you kind of look at things together and have to break it apart at the same time and move back. That it is. It's like no, I was gonna- like when no, it's not coming.
Well,
There's
you
something in there about like being blurry and not being blurry, but
no, I think that you like, especially with your background in writing, there's a first draft where you cannot get lost in the details or you'll never finish the first
yeah.
draft. Um, and that's a whole different layer of the work, just trying to get something that has roughly the structure you want. And it's so difficult to make progress if you get stuck on one paragraph or one sentence. And I'm bad at that. I don't write and never wrote novels or attempted to write a novel, because I cannot um, sustain that first draft mode for long enough to really produce something like that. So I ended up really liking working in theater, really liking working on poems and songs because that lives in the zoomed in world of a smaller structure where I feel happy and I feel like it's okay to spend time working on
Mm.
sentences, paragraphs, words, line breaks. And if I tried to write a 400-page novel like that, I just would never ever get it done. So yeah, I think that blurry, not blurry makes some sense in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And like when you're going there's um your rough draft, right? For no matter what you do. Like you can have a coding rough draft too, where you get it working, right? But you
Yeah.
know that you can make the code better. And so I think even like if you break down the process, you can pseudocode something and then you can code and make it work. And that's your second draft. And then you can go back and do those revisions that really make it do what you want it to do, but also like how you want it to do it in the most efficient way that you can. I like thinking of that as part of the process. I don't think that I thought about that before, but that like makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Lately, I've started a routine where I will do that get it working pass first, even if it's horrendous. And then I will write the tests for the thing that I just
Mm.
wrote that's working so that I can go through and refactor and try to make it right code wise and, to think about reuse and think about readability and stuff. And then at a certain point, I know it's still wrong, but I have to cut it off and make a pull request because there's not much value in making it better to read or like more efficient to reuse something because we do have to actually complete work. which also really reminds me of when I used to send poems out to magazines. I'm like, I know this is still terrible, but it's time. It's time to send it out.
I
I
found
think that
poetry magazine editors were the meanest people that I have ever met. They would send the meanest rejections. I'm like,
no,
you are personally attacking me. Why did you do that to me?
yeah, I used to. I think the framing of this that I heard was that like poems are never finished; they're just abandoned. Like at a certain point, you have to move on with your life and start writing the next one. And so there's so many even great things that we love that people have made that you look back and you just see these are, you know, things somebody felt anxious about and hated and thought it was still not finished when they released it. And like, luckily, you don't get to actually experience that when you read the work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And I mean, you were saying this, but I think that's true of pretty much anything you can create, right? I mean, you can, the, you try to improve things forever, you know?
Yeah.
And I've heard that advice, you know, from a lot of other people too, is especially when it comes to maybe blogging, things like that, right? Is like, just get it out there, you know, and then you can always improve it if you want to later. You know, Jana was on talking about was it the digital garden, you know, thing, and how you can kind of put something out there, even in a rough draft. I mean, like it's up to your comfort level, but it's okay to like put things out there, you know, that aren't completely perfect, because nothing is ever going to be completely perfect. And accepting that can be hard for sure.
Yeah.
I have found myself deep in a hole, spending half an afternoon on something that literally like has no effect on the world, and nobody is ever going to notice or care if it's better or worse, or, you know, and I'm just like, I know I could do that. You know, I know I could get it better. I know I can like whatever. And it can be easy to stop into that trap, you know?
Yeah. That's always the stuff that ends up later on getting like cut from the roadmap.
Right. Right. Yeah. Oh, that reminds me. That's the other thing I was going to say is getting that pull request. So like there is a level of refinement that you want to wait till other people maybe have looked at something first to confirm that it's even going to stay, that it's even going to be worth like the extra time, you know, spent,
Yeah.
if needed, or even if it's needed, you know. And most of the time, I think when a teammate will look at something, they'll be like, "This is good, you know, this is good enough. Like let's keep moving, because we can put efforts, you know, other places." But it can be hard to let go sometimes of those things.
Totally.
Yeah, and so we're talking about, you know, relating all of these different things from music and writing and coding. And so you have this non-traditional background, but you've also um, done a lot of work helping other people from non-traditional backgrounds coming into the industry. Can you just talk a little bit about, you know, how you've done that and maybe share a highlight story?
Yeah, totally. So for me, like the thing that really helped me think about this as a job and change was starting to go to meetups in Atlanta. And at my first meetup, it was a meetup for. Oh, wait, I think that pancakes might be about to arrive. No, maybe yes. Unclear. Okay, we're gonna move on.
You can go check for your pancake.
I mean, are there pancakes for all of us?
Let's find out.
I don't like pancakes.
You don't like
Or-
pancakes?
No, I'm like a savory breakfast person. I usually don't like the sweet stuff.
But Becca,
Maybe crepes that are like stuffed with cream cheese filling. That I will take those.
I would do a savory crepe. See, a crepe I would prefer to be savory than sweet, like a crepe with like cheese and meat or something in it, you know. But like pancakes, a pancake you can like a pancake on its own, if you make it, unless you're going crazy, it's not very sweet, right? And so it's all about how much like stuff you put on top of it, right?
Yeah, it's just like boring. I don't know.
But I'm saying mix it in with some like meat and eggs, and, you know, and a little bit of syrup, because you get a little bit of sweet with savory, you know, like really like helps everything kind of.
Are you telling me to mix up my pancakes with meat?
Not mixed. I mean, I'm saying eat them on a plate together, not mixed up.
Oh yeah, I definitely took it
Not
as
like mixed up next to each other, and then eat them at the same time as if it was a meal.
So they
with multiple plates.
Either way, I have pancakes now. I'm not going to eat them right next to this microphone though, for everyone's benefit. But so we get back to this first meetup I went to. This is I like this
Thanks
story.
for bringing it back, Mark, because that could have gone.
I know. I'm spiraling on this pancake thing.
So, so I part of Free Code Camp was you're onboarding in Free Code Camp, and they tell you to go join the Facebook group for your city. And if there's not a Facebook group in your city, you're supposed to start it. So it's really good. That was how it was back then, at least. So I found the Facebook group for Free Code Camp Atlanta, and they were meeting in a certain coffee shop at a certain time. So first tech meetup. I was pretty nervous. I didn't know how to act at a tech meetup. I didn't know too many people in Atlanta yet, or what even happened there. So I go to the coffee shop, and I see a group of like 6 or 7 people sitting around a table with laptops and talking and stuff. And I'm like, okay, this is obviously the right group. And so I woke up and I'm talking to them for a few minutes, asking people, what are they working on? They're like, hey, what are you doing? I'm learning this. I'm working on some JavaScript. And then at some point I mentioned Free Code Camp, and they didn't know what I was talking about. This was a group of strangers who were just tolerating me, interrupting their meeting. And they were just too nice to tell me to go away. And so once we figured it out, we had a little bit of a laugh, and I was like, okay, well, the worst has happened. This is the worst thing that could possibly happen with these meetups. So I'm through that. But what it was those people were from Code for Atlanta. And so they're like, we're not your meetup that you came to, but we do run a different meetup, and you should come to that. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to go to that. I can't live this moment down. I'm going to stay as far away from that as I can, obviously. And so I went over to the other table where there were just 2 people sitting down there. And I was like, I asked a crucial question this time. Are you the Free Code Camp meetup? And who was sitting there was Narando Johnson and our friend Krista. That's the 2 people that were there. And obviously that was a life-changing moment for me, because me and Narando and Krista have been friends like ever since, and help each other. So through the kindness of everybody at that meetup, and through people showing up to just like, I realized that week after week, people were going there who were not just learning, but also people who had been through it, and people who had jobs and were coming back just to hang out and answer questions and support. And so I learned so much from those meetups, having specific people there who could say, oh, the problem you're having today, the solution is not continue hacking in the bad way that you're hacking. The solution is you should learn Firebase so that you can have users and have data stored properly. And that will solve like all of the pain that you're having trying to do something weird with cookies or write to the server in PHP or whatever. So those moments were really helpful for me. And when I actually did start going to Code for Atlanta, getting into the hackathons there, like also just improved my confidence and improved my skills. So having gone through that, I think it's nice to sort of pay that back when people are new in the industry as well. You always learn a lot when you're trying to help people. And I vividly remember the sort of embarrassment and hesitation that you feel when you're starting to learn and trying to convince yourself that it's possible to switch careers, and it seems ridiculous. So I like those. I like doing kind of portfolio reviews, mock interviews, since I've been on the hiring side a little bit as well. Like those are really useful, and you get to know people and kind of make connections that stick with you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that, like you were saying about learning Firebase rather than continuing hacking in a way that doesn't make sense, that's so hard to figure out if you're learning on your own, because it just really depends on what resources you've read and how you've understood things. And sometimes there are resources, there are blog posts out there that are not giving you the best information. And so recognizing that, like, hey, there's a lot written out there. Not everything is going to teach you the right ways or the best practices, and figuring out how to discern between what is a good resource and not can be really, really tricky when you're on your own. So that's why meetups like that are awesome.
Yeah. And I would also say, like, this is true even if you're not learning, it's, you can be very experienced, like be developing for a long time, but be kind of isolated, and it's possible. And I say this as, the person who I'm just describing myself a couple years ago, basically. But it's like that exposure to other people. And it's just like Mark said, like, oh, just use Firebase. Like somebody just saying that, and it doesn't have to be somebody who's, a mentor or somebody who's teaching or whatever. It can be somebody who's also just learning, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
those, that exposure to other people who are doing the same sorts of things as you are, it's so important. And so, and useful, just even on a like tactical level, you know what I mean? It just like makes you better just by, osmosis almost, even if you're not like, actively doing talks or doing, hackathon, whatever, just like that exposure to people. And,
Yeah. And you could go to that group and
excellent.
just kind of hang out, kind of like the co-working room and virtual coffee, where sometimes I went to that meetup and I really didn't say anything to anybody because I was juggling some jobs. I would usually get there after work and have like some goal. Like I was like, I need to do this. And for some reason, being around all these people, even if they're really busily talking, gives me enough energy to actually spend 2 or 3 hours coding and do the thing I came to do. Versus if I went home, I would just be like, I'm tired after work and not have that energy from those people. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, totally. And the other part is, I mean, the other benefit of a small group like that, especially in-person ones, which I know is like very, very hard right now, but, it's the kind of thing we're trying to recapture, at least in virtual coffee. But you can get exposure on Twitter, like by following a whole bunch of people, right? But you never know exactly what's going to happen. And if you don't know the people, then you're lots of times following people that other people, based on numbers and based on what Twitter's algorithm kind of pushes in front of you. And you, again, you can't always know, exactly like who the people are or whether you can trust their information and stuff like that. And, when you're in a group of just people, uh, it's like a small group. It's much more, there's no like, you can't tell how many people follow that person,
Yeah.
everyone's just sitting in a room together. There's nobody has like inherent value, with air quotes value, bigger than another person. One person has 20 followers on Twitter, another has, 10,000. But when they're in just the room together talking, then sort of everybody's more on like a similar level, which I think
Yeah.
improves the communication there too.
And I remember seeing Krista, who is fantastic and was kind of years ahead of me in her development experience and like being along learning. Um, and seeing her knowing that she knows more than me and is really good at what she does. And when somebody would bring up a topic that she hadn't run into yet, she would just ask the question. She'd be like, "Oh, I don't know what that is. Tell me about it." And not feel a need to like, um, I don't know, pretend that you know everything or like show off. People aren't going there to show off. People are going there to learn. And so seeing somebody that I know is better than me, still comfortable, I'm like, oh, maybe this is why she's better than me. Like, this is how you get good, is you keep asking questions and you don't try to bluff. Um, and like use your curiosity to drive you. So some of those moments kind of stood out to me that I think you can only witness when you're in a group and see a dynamic, and see different people handling situations in different ways. So yeah, whether it's a virtual group or not, but it's nice that we have this exposure to other people.
Yeah, I think when you have that exposure, it allows you to build some sort of relationship of trust and understanding, and there's more of a comfort level. So there's a built-in credibility almost. And so you can feel freer to ask questions in some situations,
Yeah.
or to know, like, even people that I know from virtual coffee. I'm not a big YouTube tutorial watcher, but if I know somebody from virtual coffee or if I've met them in real life, it's easier for me to watch their videos, I think, because it's like, okay, yeah, this is my friend and I know they know what they're talking about, or all right, I know that this person talks about this, so I'm going to go watch their video. And so it allows for that, I don't know, like a step towards trusting that they will be a good resource for you. Um So now that experience with Code for Atlanta was not your last experience with them, right?
No. So this is good. This ties into another thing like that I try to communicate to new developers, which is how to put things on your resume that are like closer to professional work than even solo projects you do on your own. And for me, Code for Atlanta had a connection for me because they were running a hackathon series with MARTA. MARTA is Atlanta's transit agency. And working at People Making Progress, which I'm still connected with, I was working as a job coach and running supported employment programs where people would use the MARTA mobility service to get from home to work. So an example is somebody with Down syndrome who works bagging groceries, or somebody who's working in a dish room or something that we used to support would schedule these rides. The bus takes you door to door. But scheduling and everything around scheduling was done over the phone, which is pretty difficult for people with cognitive impairments or speech impediments, like challenges around judgment when you're sitting in a phone queue. So I had a lot of experience of the pain of working with MARTA, and Atlanta, Code for Atlanta was running these events. And I saw it as my chance to like talk to MARTA, not on the phone, but be in their face and say, hey, here's a lot of stuff that's happening on the phone that probably could be happening through the website or something like that. And my proposal for the hackathon was, here's a better way to handle like booking and canceling rides and keeping people informed of when the van is coming, because they have a 30-minute window. And sometimes it's Atlanta, there's always traffic. Sometimes the bus can be an hour late, be an hour and a half late. But if you're waiting for it and they come, you only have 5 minutes to get to the bus before they move on. So people would just stand outside for as long as it takes, in the hot, in the cold, in the rain, whether they have to pee. Really bad situation for people to just be waiting without knowing how long the bus comes. And I could get more into the weeds of that problem, but that's the general idea. And the solution, because I knew when I would call on behalf of somebody and I would pick up the phone and say, hey, when is Kevin's bus going to get here? I could feel that that person was just clicking on a computer and reading a line off of a sheet and telling me what the time said at like that field of the estimated time of arrival, which if I could just publish that time on the website, we could read that ourselves and we wouldn't have to tie up the phones all the time asking about the late buses. So I went to the hackathon there and met some people. I think I really wanted to go to the hackathon because in CS50 they explain what a hackathon is. And I was like, I want to have that 24-hour experience of like seeing what it's like to do it. Narando came along for that hackathon and we met two other people just chatting beforehand who became the team. I learned about how to turn like that idea into a kind of app solution. So we had somebody who knew about iOS. He worked on like actually building out an iOS app based on some wireframes that we made and some wish lists I had of what we would be able to do. And that was a 3-part event. So we actually had 2 more cracks at this. We convinced MARTA to provide some data to us about the disability support mobility service they had, because this was not a part of the hackathon data set. This was like something we were bringing in that we wanted to work on. We worked with them for a while. We made a pilot for them that they actually used for a few weeks. And as it turned out, they were separately in negotiations to buy something that did some similar stuff. So on the one hand, it was a bummer. We didn't get to like really ship our code. We were able to get into meetings with the third-party provider who they were using to provide this service and give them early feedback on what their product did or didn't do that would be useful for the population we wanted to help. So it got us like in the room for those types of conversations. And it let me put MARTA on my resume as like, I did a project with MARTA. I'm not saying it was a paid project. I'm not saying I was a consultant or anything, but here's a project with an organization that you've heard of in your city that is different to my calculator that's on CodePen. That is homework from FreeCodeCamp. And like using Civic Tech to connect with nonprofits or other organizations that you can do work for so that you have something people have heard of on your resume that you've contributed to. Maybe you had requirements, you worked with a team, all this like benefits of adding to your resume beyond a project you came up with on your own. really strengthened that and let me talk about something different in interviews. So I really believe like my purpose at Code for Atlanta now is not so much to support any specific project, but to like support people building their resumes who are new to the industry and have work for them to do. That's kind of what motivates me to stay involved and spend some time like helping to organize things when I'm able to do that.
I love that. And I think, we hear a lot of advice to early career folks to, get into open source, and that's a good way to build your resume. But I like this idea of civic tech because it seems like it would be a more intimate group of people communicating together. Whereas you almost feel in a lot of open source contributions like you're an outsider coming in. And if you need help, it's harder to ask because there's not clear paths of communication or whatever. But when you're working on something that's mission driven and that has a team of people that need to communicate, those are certainly all skills that you can be utilizing and kind of building your own team, right? So if you're involved in a community like Free Code Camp or Code for Atlanta or Virtual Coffee or whatever, you can turn to people and say, like, look, there's a nonprofit in my hometown and they could really use some help. I'd love to ask them if I could work on a project for them, but I could use some support. Is anybody else interested? And I think that's a really great way to show, like, look, you are taking initiative, you are working on a project, and that is not a calculator or, a to do list app. And really, really kind of own the project yourself is a great way to showcase what you can do, to learn a lot pretty quickly. And yeah, to have something on your resume.
Yeah. And Narendra will be annoyed if I don't mention this because I do sometimes forget to mention this. That project extended into a different event that was a Civic Tech challenge that was run by GE and AT&T. And so our team kind of rebuilt the project, added some smart city integration because it was a smart city thing. And we won a $40,000 prize, which we didn't expect to win. So we had all signed in advance that we agreed to donate this to charity because we thought maybe we'd come in third or whatever. So like, it's I think it's a better story that we gave away when we were all broke. This is the thing, like we didn't have jobs yet as developers. But we agreed that so many people had contributed to this that it would be kind of unfair for just the 6 people on the team at the time of that competition to walk away with the money. Because it was a long project with like 20, 30 people who did something on it. So we all felt good about that. And we thought maybe we'd come in third, which was like $5,000, not too much. But when you get involved in stuff like this, it does have potential. This won't happen to everybody. It has potential to snowball into a weird side effect of like donating more to charity than you make in a year. So
Yeah.
that was good. That was a good thing that we did, and I still stand by it. But it also is weird if I forget to finish the story with that detail.
Yeah. No, he might have mentioned that when he was on the podcast as well. I think he pretty much felt the same way as you. Like, well, I'm glad we did it, but also.
Well, the thing I like about it is when that's the outcome of a project, it doesn't matter that like MARTA didn't use our prototype. We got money to charities that serve people with disabilities, which enables them to increase their mission and have impact. And like, because I worked at one of those charities, I know what that money is spent on. So through the channel of Civic Tech, if you are able to enter and win prizes and donate prizes, you have this other way of making impact that's actually probably a little bit more effective than counting on any single project to really take off and be implemented. It's like a lot of the work in Civic Tech, if it's not tightly integrated with an actual organization or a nonprofit, is more like proof of concepts. Here's how you could do your government. Here's how you could do your MARTA mobility service. Mm-hmm. And it shows the way to something, but it might not be, the technical solution that actually gets implemented. But if it gets the conversation going or you raise some money with it, like that's a valuable output. Or if it helps someone get a job, that's a valuable output for um, the activity of civic tech that can sometimes seem like it goes nowhere.
Yeah, I love that. And, and is, um, like Becca was saying, yeah, some people, it's a little easier to conceive of going into trying to contribute to open source, stuff like that. But that Civic Tech is a little more, so what I was going to say was, it was a little more, nebulous in my mind. If you, excuse me, if a developer was like wanted to start getting involved in this, in maybe they don't live in Atlanta, like where would I look? Like if I wanted to, try to get involved in Civic Tech a little bit more in Cleveland, for instance, like, should I just Google Civic Tech Cleveland and see what comes up? Or are there like specific places, that you might look first? Like what can we do to, like
Within the
somebody wants to do this?
US, there's definitely Code for America is like the umbrella organization. Code for America itself is a nonprofit that does specific projects and has employees and often works with local governments and organizations like that. But it also supports the Brigade Network, which is all around the US. There's many brigades. I forget how many, but most states have at least one. Um, and you can find your local project from there. And there are also civic tech communities around the world. So I guess I'll have to look up the address for that and we can put it somewhere.
Put in the show
Um,
notes.
yeah, but I know there are communities in Ireland, there are communities kind of all around that are united by the sort of social good impact civic tech work. People consider the actual details of what's important to focus on differently in those communities, depending on kind of what their mission is. Obviously, my point of view is like helping people get exposure. Very much I'm focused on the nonprofit side of things, not as much on the interfacing with government entities. But so there are different roles you can see a civic tech organization having. But it's really nice when most of the time there is plenty of people to do the work and there's also plenty of projects happening at once. So you can come in and find something where you can either learn or you can participate. And the kind of people who do these things tend to be of the helpful variety, like whoever's giving up a Tuesday night to go and work for free for a nonprofit they never heard of. They're probably nice enough to help you set up Git and do things
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
like this is where I learned how to use Git properly. It's where I learned how to install packages. Like just real basic stuff came from Code for Atlanta, and people helping me there.
And I just want to follow that up and say that when you're working on, you don't have to work on a time intensive project, right? So I know, there are people that are learning who have jobs and kids or other responsibilities, and they might say, like, wow, that's just not doable. But I think that, there are so many different options out there. And, one, if you're working on a 3-day project, you are going to learn so much in those 3 days that it might be more than weeks worth of work that you're learning by yourself. And so, kind of thinking about the benefits, or, look at a longer project, start something yourself with other people and say, like, we're going to do this over a period of 6 weeks and then evaluate where we are. And it's going to be 5 hours a week or whatever. It doesn't make it work for you, but those experiences are invaluable as you're making your way into the tech industry.
Totally. And I agree, it can be slow. Our MARTA thing went on for about a year, maybe more. A lot of it is really incremental progress. Some of the projects I worked on only did anything twice a month at the Civic Hack Night.
Mhm.
So I would work really hard to prepare for a Civic Hack Night because I would have people who wanted to come and work on something like freelivetranscript.com that you guys have seen. Um, and so a lot of the work that's on that now came from a Civic Hack Night where I have like 2 hours with people. So I'm going to try to explain how the whole project works in the first few minutes and then figure out what everybody's good at and what they want to do and come up with tasks and get them assigned out and like check on them. And sometimes that works beautifully. And sometimes it's hard to get people going because the code is pretty ugly in there and you need a certain level of experience to undo what I did when I wrote that project. But like sometimes it is effective and you can get 8 hours of work done by 4 people in a 2 hour period, which really moves a project forward. Um, and now 4 people know how to work on it. And one of them might have like a bee in their bonnet and want to come back and fix it the next time. Or sometimes they just drift off. Doesn't matter. They contributed. They got something out of it. Um, I kind of liken it to being in a band in college where sometimes most people would show up to practice and like you're relying on volunteers. Your expectations should be that things are going to be slow. And every now and then a hackathon will come and they'll be really fast for a few days. But mostly you will try to set up your tickets and try to set up your list of tasks to be like, anybody can pick this up and nothing's too big or too small for someone to take a crack at a hack night. And even the smallest ticket is really meaningful if it's someone's first pull request that they've made to an open source project or something like that. So fixing a spelling mistake or whatever can be like, hey, it's my first time forking a repo and contributing to open source, just like we're doing with Hacktoberfest at this moment in time. That does kind of break the mystery of how to do that. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that any step forward starts the momentum, right? And so if you are changing a typo or something small, then it's still moving you forward and getting you ready for the next time you create a pull request and feeling a little bit more confident as you do that. So I don't think that we should diminish any contributions. It's good to get started and to get in there.
Yeah. And I mean, this is something we talk about a lot with Virtual Coffee, but it is hard to get into open source. There's a lot of, and this is true, I'm sure, of Civic Tech, like just open source in general, right? There's a bunch of things to learn, and so honestly, if you're doing something that is maybe a small contribution to the code itself, like fixing a typo, then it frees you up to actually just concentrate on learning about Git or learning about pull requests, learning about that process without trying to learn a mountain of coding stuff at the same time, right? It's a great way to, I think that's the best way to get started in, and get and contribute, open source, things like that is do, small contributions where you're not overshooting, you're not biting off a big chunk of something code wise to start, because then you can just concentrate on the one thing, learning one thing at a time.
I'm like really struck by how working in the industry for 4 or 5 years now, or whatever it is, you're only using a tiny slice of your programming knowledge at a time. Relative to all that you have learned already, you're still only using a tiny amount of that. And relative to all the stuff you could learn that's so scary when you're getting started, you're like using a little dot of knowledge. Like I work in a Vue code base and I use Tailwind for CSS, and I do certain things that like are their own little bubble and have their own documentation. And it doesn't matter that I even know PHP from before. I'm not using it. I guess I learned something from learning that. But like when you actually see projects in action and talk with people, they're like, hey, you can contribute. And here's the tiny area that you need to know about. Like you need to know how to extract this thing from a loop in JavaScript and make it more efficient. And here's the tiny piece of documentation that will help you do that. And then ask me if you need help. Like that reveals that we're still focused on just like really small areas of the overall practice of programming. At any given moment on any given ticket, we're not using the 100 things that we could know about.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree with that. And I think that's actually another benefit of getting involved in a project like a civic hacking project, where somebody else, if you have somebody like Mark who is sort of running the project, right, and you join as somebody who's learning, you can be provided, like, one of the challenges of learning when you're learning is that cloud of, there's a huge amount of things that you could learn, right? So if you go to something like this, I want to contribute, like now you have the thing to do set in front of you, and maybe you can just concentrate on learning just that one thing, and it removes the choice, and then maybe you'll figure out, well, I hate this. I don't like JavaScript or something, or I don't like something, and you can move on, but that's just another benefit of getting involved with groups like this, especially a civic hacking group that is going to have projects, like is going to have work to do, and help doing it. That's my my go-to advice for learning is just like do a project, just do something, but it's like obviously bad advice, like can be bad advice because like, well, what do I do then, Dan? And then I'm like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
But this is like something that provides that.
And I'll say as well, it provided me with leadership experience. I did not go in wanting to run the project. I was like, so if I have an idea, do I also have to run it? And they're like, yeah, you have to, if it's your idea, you pitch it, you own it, you will get people to join your team. And I was like, okay, I'll learn how to pitch a project. And I would be very nervous at first. And like I got feedback one night from somebody who was like part of the local Toastmasters or something. He just happened to be there.
It's a recurring theme here, Toastmasters.
Yeah, was it Kant?
I don't know, but it was just like he offered to take notes on me pitching and give me like, he had 3 or 4 points. He's like, you move way too much. Your idea is good and your communication's clear, but you speak too softly and you're swaying and it's distracting. But here's the good things, and that was you don't have to remember much advice to be like, okay, I'm going to move less and try to slow down a little bit. And just from being at a hack night, happening to run into people who are experienced looking at how you're doing when you speak.
Yeah.
So a lot of benefits for me, random, unpredictable benefits from being involved in Code for Atlanta.
Yeah, when I want to follow up on that too and say that that's a skill set, right, that you're learning. Not everybody can pitch. It's not a natural thing. Well, maybe for some people it's a natural thing that you're born with, but for a lot of us, it's a skill that we need to work on and get evaluation. And it goes right along with interviewing, right? Because you are essentially pitching yourself. And if you are using the wrong tone, or I will never forget, I think I was 11 years old. It was my first science fair project. And the highest you could get was a superior. I got an excellent. And I was like very upset with my excellent. And the feedback I got was inappropriate inflection at the end of sentences, right? So what that means is when I talked, I would talk and end like it was a question rather than actually saying what I actually knew about the project, right? And so right there, you lose credibility. And I worked very hard to not do that anymore. But having that feedback has allowed me to grow as a speaker and be more deliberate and to think through how I'm doing things. And so maybe your tone is wrong when you're interviewing and you're not coming off as credible, or maybe you're not completing your sentences. There have been times in my life where I would just start a sentence and then I would get overwhelmed with people looking at me and I would just stop. There was no end to that sentence. And usually I ended it with so, and that was it.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Yeah, I've done that.
didn't know where to go from there. And it is something that I have to think about still, even, if I'm in a situation where I suddenly get uncomfortable, like don't end your sentence with so. It's not
I've
a
done
complete
that.
sentence.
It implies that you're going to keep speaking, so it actually makes it take even longer for people to realize that you've stopped.
Just like want someone to pick it up for me. Like, so somebody help.
I've never done anything like that.
Never.
Except for every single podcast episode.
Oh yeah, but's another one. Sometimes I'd be like, so yeah, that's it. But
yes.
Yep.
100% do that.
You probably look through the transcripts and just see all of the times I've done that.
Yeah. I'm very
even on the
self-conscious
podcast,
about how much I may have done that in the last hour.
Yeah. Well,
we'll find out.
Yeah, we have we're using what's it called? Descript now for podcast editing, which is a really cool tool. But one of the things it does is highlights filler words. And we could just remove them all or something, I mean, I know that I'm sure there's some podcasts that will do that or whatever. I don't do that both because it is time consuming, but also this is natural. This is a pretty chill, podcast in general, but it does highlight all of them and I can see them in my, in the transcripts for my paragraphs of talking. It's
publish the stats, Dan.
My God,
don't keep this from the people.
I don't think I'm going to do that. It'd be too embarrassing. Well, I'll do it for maybe I'll
But
do it for just this episode.
but we
can
have
see.
transcripts available for every episode. So if somebody would like
Yes.
to just go do a control find, you will know how many ums we have had in every episode. You can publish it for us. Well, I think we're about at time, Mark. This was really great to hear about Civic Tech. I actually am like really excited to go find some Civic Tech projects and think about how I can get involved in this more. But is there any last piece of advice you have for our listeners?
Um, I think that it's natural to not be sure. If we're talking to listeners specifically who are learning development, which is not everybody, like in the virtual coffee community. But like I remember so much hesitation and not being sure that this was the right thing or it was going to work out. Um, that does not actually mean that it's not the right thing or it's not going to work out. So I would suggest people find some way to live with that feeling. It may well be there for many years into your career for a lot of us. Um, and it's just not a very useful feeling. So I would encourage people to let it be and keep working regardless and don't pay any mind to the part of you that's saying that because it's not going to help you learn. And it obviously from the amount of people who have come through the same journey these people are going on, it doesn't hold you back.
Yeah, it's so great. Well, thanks so much for being here with us today, Mark, and we will talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks, Mark.
I'm waving goodbye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. This episode was produced by Dan Ott and Becca Harrott-Weigel and was edited by Andy Bonjour at Good Day Communications. If you have questions or comments, you can hit us up on Twitter at virtualcoffee.io or email us at podcast@virtualcoffee.io. You can find the show notes, sign up for our newsletter, check out any of our other resources on our website at virtualcoffee.io. And of course, join us for our virtual coffee chats every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Eastern and Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Please subscribe to our podcast and be sure to leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.